You're here with Nick Agafonoff and Rigas Harbilas from the Practice Insights. Today we're going to be talking about a number of topics. Firstly, rebranding or renaming an actual name for a company, a product or a service. What's the difference between a rebrand and a rename? So we'll be talking about Twitter becoming X, also Coke putting zero back into its no sugar products. Secondly, we're going to be discussing, does woke make companies broke? This has been a big topic in a lot of social discourse lately, is this idea that companies have been trying to market to specific audiences with a specific set of values and identity projects. For example, Bud Light recently sponsored a trans influencer, and this resulted in a huge backlash to usage of Bud Light, and it's lost a lot of business since then. And more recently, Victoria's Secret decided to ditch wokeness over sexiness after losing more than $1 billion when it established a marketing and advertising strategy that celebrated different body types. And finally today, we're going to be discussing the Voice Referendum in Australia. Why did Australia say no? Was it something to do with the advertising campaign of the Yes campaign and the No campaign? Rigas, to begin with, what is the difference between a rebrand and a rename? And why do you do either of them in the first place?
Twitter to X? Would you call it a rename or a rebrand, that particular one?
I would call it a rename because a rename to me is something that is far more far-reaching than a rebrand. A rebrand is usually something like a refresh to the logo. So you're not changing the logo or the name of the brand, you're refreshing it, you're refreshing the overall visual identity of the brand, and you might also be tinkering with the main tagline or benefit communication of the brand. Whereas a rename is much more drastic. It's actually changing the entire identity of the brand, of the product, of the service that you're marketing, and replacing it with a new set of values and maybe even an entirely new idea at the center of that brand.
So that's a fantastic definition, I think, actually, Nick. A rebranding is essentially you're not changing the brand. You are, I guess, in some ways refreshing the brand. You're using current familiar mnemonic structures of the brand even. You're not chucking away everything about the brand. You're bringing some of it along. I guess that's the kind of stuff where marketing is involved in very, very frequently. Whereas to your point, so Twitter to X being a renaming means that something drastic is going on. Something drastic is happening, which means the very nature of that brand or organization behind that brand is, has undergone or will be undergoing drastic change. With a brand that had, 100% awareness, etc., right? Why would you do away with something like a Twitter brand?
In terms of Twitter to X, I think it's very clear that, daylight put between the past of Twitter and the future of X, in terms of its function as a media and information distribution platform, in terms of who the users are as well. Twitter became very defined by a particular political audience. The renaming was used to really define the end of something and the beginning of something entirely new.
This is what I think of the point I want to make now, is what remained underneath those brands is ostensibly a platform. I would imagine that the platform has been retained, right? So the basic functionality, the basic whatever of Twitter has been retained under X, more or less. But what X means now, I've got another question now, because of course X is linked with Elon Musk, and of course Elon is linked with Tesla and many and other things, of course. But Tesla obviously being the kind of the archetypal brand that he's sort of linked with. And I was just thinking, yeah, if you look around the world, look at the companies with massive market capitalizations and whatnot. They are platform companies. They are Amazons. They are Google. They are Metas. You know what I mean? These are platforms in a sense, right? They don't even sort of make anything. They're just platforms. And Elon Musk being who he is, didn't have a platform. I mean, he's got Tesla and he's got SpaceX, but they make stuff. They have to press metal. They have to do. They have to make something and be competitive in that market. But there was no platform there, and so basically buying out Twitter under the auspices of I want to bring back free speech, and call it X. I think that's a bit of an excuse. I think really was a desire for the acquisition of a platform that basically allowed him to kind of compete and to be present at that level of society. What we call the technocratic elite.
What I'd also add, though, is that I think there is a marketing strategy behind renaming it X as well. X is an interesting logo that is chosen. It's also enveloped by black semiotics as well. So this dark masculine X logo, for me, it's easily interpreted as relating to cancel culture. So X represents not being cancelled, if you like. And I think that Elon Musk is reading market trends here and seeing that there is this reaction that is occurring within marketplaces to particular ideological dispositions. And he's taking a punt here with this renaming of Twitter to X. He's taking a punt that the counterculture for many consumers, where they're railing against things like cancel culture, is actually a greater opportunity than the woke audience that represented Twitter in the past.
But does that also infuse a brand like Tesla, for example? So does that basically work backwards in the sense that, okay, well, I don't know, is that car, even though it's the wokest of woke cars, it's the first amazing electric car, it's the wokest of woke cars, but its boss is definitely not the wokest of woke CEOs, from that perspective.
What we know from the past was that Coke had this very popular product in Australia. It was called Coke Zero. Once again, it had that black semiotics. It was enveloped in black semiotics, like the new X logo is. So it had that masculine component to it, but it was very popular with both men and women. It was a no sugar product. But then Coke decided to remove Coke Zero and come in with a Coke no sugar product or brand. So it replaced the Zero brand and it replaced it with no sugar. And this was not very popular at the time in Australia. There was a decline in sales of Coke products, Coke no sugar products. And then in due course, Coke has now recently rebranded its no sugar product as Coke Zero Sugar. So it hasn't brought back zero as the name of the product. It's simply inserted it into the no sugar product, replacing the word no with zero sugar. So this is interesting because it seems like some sort of a concession that Coke has done. It's having an each way bet. It isn't necessarily renaming its no sugar product. It's simply tinkering around the edges, and it's trying to leverage off the equity of its old Zero product.
And Zero, of course, from a marketing perspective at the time was pure genius because it's got an immense cut through the letter Z, like you said with X. XZ, right? So, and zero is an interesting word because it's different to no, isn't it? No. So a kid comes up, when you're a kid, you go and ask your dad or mum for something and they don't say zero, they say no. So it's kind of like, so zero says what you wanted to say without that negativity of the word no.
Exactly. And, and I was a Coke Zero drinker, a loyal Coke Zero drinker. And a couple of things in terms of my interpretation of Coke Zero. First of all, Coke to me has always represented enjoyment. It's pure enjoyment. When I have a Coke, it's pure enjoyment. And then zero, when you added zero onto Coke, it was freedom. It was no responsibility. I didn't have there were no consequences of having this enjoyment. So Coke Zero was a truly liberatory brand for me. But when they replaced it with no sugar, that word no had a big impact on me. It turned into no enjoyment, no fun, no freedom. It felt like my mother telling me to clean up my room or clean up my act. It felt like a moral statement, the complete antithesis of what drinking a Coke should be about for me. And that's when I turned to Pepsi.
Coke made a decision that from now on, their flagship product was going to be the no sugar product. So their advertising was only going to show the no sugar product. They were only going to ever only refer to it as Coke, the Coke No Sugar product. And so therefore, Coke No Sugar has to be the brand that represents freedom. If I'm not showing regular Coke as representing freedom and no sugar Coke culturally overtakes regular Coke, then that has to embody freedom. And I think you're absolutely right. The word no sugar just somehow doesn't ring true with the freedom. The move back to zero is an interesting concession to what they had initially,
I think it is a concession. I think that no sugar hasn't actually worked, even though they've had the bigger picture strategy of turning it into a commodity brand and getting people to just drink Coke, not zero. But having this each way bet of zero sugar, it's not going to harm the product. It's not going to do anything negative to it. It might encourage some previous zero drinkers to drink a Coke, but it doesn't have the strength of personality and identity and statement that the original Coke Zero product has. So this is, to me, something which won't harm Coke. It won't do any damage to it. Is this anything to crow about from a rebranding or renaming perspective? No, this isn't significant.
It's what you would term a rebrand in a way, but it's so small, it's barely even a rebrand. It's not that noticeable.
I think that the concession to rebranding it as zero sugar is a concession that the no sugar rebranding was actually has been relatively unsuccessful, hasn't brought Coke the sales that it should have. And I'll even extend this into our next topic of conversation, which is, does woke make companies broke? I think the obsession with no sugar over a number of years by not just Coca-Cola, but by a number of different companies, is actually part of a broader woke paradigm, which is about stakeholder capitalism. And stakeholder capitalism is this idea that we actually, companies, corporations need to take care of people. They don't just treat markets and consumers as markets and consumers anymore. They actually need to kind of make sure that people are healthier and have good values and the right priorities in life, etc., etc. So this brings me to our next question, which is the question of, does woke make companies broke? Because this is being discussed everywhere at the moment.
You've got two examples there, Nick, which is two very famous ones, I think, which is the Bud Light situation in the US, where they used I think it's safe to say it was a trans person as a character. It's a beer, it's masculine, it's traditional, Budweiser, right? What do they call it? Baseball, men, all that stuff, right? The old stuff, and the light version of that had massive sales as a result of the halo effect of the Budweiser culture. the company wanted perhaps to update its image or itself and started, and one of the ways of doing so was to introduce a trans character, etc. It may have been done, it probably was done with the intention of bringing in, a younger audience. They probably had an aging customer base, like probably most legacy brands, and what we've heard now is that it's backfired massively, and there has been a cultural backlash in the United States to Bud Light.
So there was a big backlash to the Target campaign as well, and there was a backlash also. Actually, Victoria's Secret came out and publicly said, well, look, we've lost $1 billion by persisting with this campaign where we celebrate different body types for women. And we've identified that the main problem with this is that these different body types don't sell. And what we need to get back to is this primary idea which does sell, which is sexiness, that sex sells in terms of women's lingerie. And we've had this epiphany, and therefore, as a result of this, if we want to exist as a successful company in the future, we need to actually take into account market realities. Market reality is that sex sells. Therefore, we're ditching the woke campaign around celebrating different body types and moving to a sexiness platform again.
Look, they're two quite good examples because it brings us back down to the archetypes of masculinity and femininity, because one of the Bud Light situation is about masculinity, and the Victoria's Secret thing is about the definition of, in a sense, femininity in a way, right? So if we break it right down, masculinity versus femininity. But both Bud Light and Victoria's Secret, even before these campaigns, are what we would have referred to in marketing as legacy brands, old brands, traditional brands, brands that play to a particular stereotype at a particular point in time that was still being consumed, because that's what happens, because it becomes a big product and it gets consumed. But we're probably eroding in terms, maybe not in sales so much, although I wouldn't be surprised, but given what's happened to the beer market here as well, but they were eroding in cultural relevance in a couple of ways. That whole kind of, that whole old style masculinity, if you like, that Budweiser celebrated or represented, doesn't really exist, Nick, amongst young men, young fathers, young whatever. They're not kind of like that. They're not playing that role anymore. We both know that, right? So that becomes a bit of a kind of a fractured image from the past anyway. And it's the same with Victoria's Secret. That whole idea of, the female body type, but wearing lingerie in order to titillate, the opposite sex mainly. Again, that's a kind of a legacy cultural concept, and I'm not sure that young women will see themselves, identify with that.
What we have here, if we link it in with the rebranding and renaming theme previously, we have exactly what you described there with these brands, which is a re-imaging, completely changing the image of the brand overnight, from being a traditional archetypal brand targeting a traditional archetypal market, which is in decline, and then overnight changing its image to try to appeal to a whole new culture, a whole new paradigm, in effect. People on social media and writing comments on YouTube channels, etc. People naturally and organically organized a boycott on the Bud Light brand. They said, we need to organize as a political group of consumers, and people did so, and by agreeing, making a pact or a compact with each other not to consume any Budweiser products. So it actually resulted in, a political countercultural movement amongst consumers.
One of the things we always like to say, I guess, with companies and corporations, and this might be a bit controversial, is that you should try not to ever get involved in politics, because because politics is very, very different to the commercial world. In the commercial world, right, Kit Kat has been the number one, or whatever, Cadbury has been the number one chocolate brand for like 40 years. You know what I mean? It's like, There it is, right? It doesn't change. And a few things change around, but it doesn't. Yeah. In the political world, Anthony Albanese is riding high 1 month, and then 8 months later, he's completely down in the doldrums. And it actually, like they say in politics, a weekend can be a lifetime in politics. And that doesn't happen in the commercial world. The commercial world is stable. It's just ongoing. It's just these brands and these companies just keep going and going and going because they make products that we like and we buy them, so, and they're cheap a lot of the time, we buy them. So, yeah.
And people say that about sport. They say keep politics and religion out of sport. And, one of the things that happened after the Rugby League Grand Final this year in Australia, Penrith winning against the Broncos, Nathan Cleary winning the player of the match, is that Nathan Cleary came out and declared that he was in support of the Yes campaign for the Voice Referendum. And on his own Penrith Panthers Facebook page, you had hundreds and hundreds of people writing in and commenting and saying, Nathan, don't get involved in this. Just stay being a rugby league player. We'll love you. But when you get involved in politics, that's when we don't love you. The same thing happened with Pat Cummins, who is the Australian cricket captain. Over a year ago, he said a statement where he wanted the sponsors of Australian cricket to be signed up to fighting global warming. There was an enormous backlash towards Pat Cummins. In fact, some people were actually calling for him to be stripped of the captaincy.
It's interesting, and I often wonder why you would leave a world of pure stability, which is all of our clients, all of our commercial clients, been big brands in operation for 100 years and nothing much changes, why you want to leave that world of pure stability, and people love the brand and all that sort of stuff, right? And then get involved in something that is that volatile that you cannot possibly predict, what might happen via a few comments or whatever. So, and I'm just wondering, why would you leave that world and enter that world of complete volatility, which is politics, And I get why politicians do it. They do it, well, that's what politics is, but corporates are not politics. Corporates are, they're supposed to make stuff and make a profit, right? I get it.
In Australia, we vote for our politicians every 4 years, but a brand is meant to be a permanent
forever
thing.
Yeah.
And it can be refreshed, and it can tap into cultural relevances and cultural change.
Well, that's what both Bud Light and Victoria's Secret would, marketing people put their hands on their heart and say, that's exactly what I was trying to do. I was trying to tap into current cultural norms.
So here's the issue, and this is, I think, an important talking point, is it's the perception of whether or not the culture is being tapped into from above or below, whether it's emerging from a grassroots or whether it's coming down from a cultural elite. And I think that what has started to occur here, and we can relate this back to Twitter becoming X and Coke putting zero back into no sugar, and Bud Light trying to put out a traditional ad after its trans influencer sponsorship, and Victoria's Secret celebrating different body types and saying, actually, no, it's sex that sells. What it is an acknowledgement that you can't impose a kind of a moral hierarchy onto audiences, that you need to tap into their culture and their morality from the grassroots, that's a much more effective way to go about it.
Underneath all of this, there is what they call a silent, well, it looks like a silent majority if we go by the referendum, which is our next topic.
Why did Australia vote no for the Voice Referendum? And it was quite a landslide in the end. Every single state voted no. The only territory that didn't vote no was the ACT. and it was 60% to 40%, so almost 2 to 1 against the referendum, the voice referendum going through. The other important statistic here is that the yes vote was very strong in affluent inner city areas, but it completely crumbled and fell to pieces when you entered suburbia, outer suburbia, and the region.
Let's analyse the marketing of it rather than why Australians did what they did.
So what about the voice doesn't make sense? Like, it just, what would be far enough? What are your thoughts?
I've heard that it could divide the nation.
How?
Okay, so I have read something online about just the nature of democracy in general.
Yes, because it's patronising to Indigenous people, and I would hate to patronise an Indigenous person.
Okay, so it doesn't go far enough, but then it also goes too far.
Yes.
Because democracy.
No,
Have you Googled it? The voice, the proposal, the referendum. Have you Googled it?
You know what? I have not had heaps of time.
yeah.
Just busy. Yeah.
Voice.
Yeah.
Have you got your phone?
Yeah.
Can I see it? I'll help you out.
Oh,
Let's see if you do have time for it. What was the last thing you searched?
well, probably just.
Oh. Did Aaron leave Love Island 13 because he had gonorrhea?
Yes.
The big questions. What is the voice referendum?
Okay. The voice referendum means we are voting to have a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice, who may make representations to Parliament and the executive government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
The voice will give independent advice to the Parliament and the government and will be chosen by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people based on the wishes of local communities. That advice then goes to Parliament, who continues to hold the ultimate power for legislative change. Okay, well, that is quite clear.
That was me.
I'd probably vote yes to
I
that.
just vote yes to that.
How did you find that? You just
That
found
is,
all of
so
this
you went
from
on Google and then you went on
That's the first
the
result.
first result there.
Yeah, well, you need to tell people about that, the Googling thing.
They should know about that.
I'm not sure. To me, that looked like a satire, like something that Rob Sitch would do. Like, would be on a Thursday, a Thursday night at the end of the 7:30 report or the news or whatever, those satire things that they did. And that would be like a satire of a voice debate.
Thing for me, a number of things that were interesting to me is that a lot of people that I know shared and watched that ad. A lot of people that I know are like tertiary educated people, professional people. They live in metropolitan areas and they loved this ad and they thought it was fantastic. But in that respect, I felt that it was preaching to the converted in a number of different ways. So how was it preaching to the converted? First of all, the length of the ad. It's actually very, very long. As an advertisement, you actually have to stick around, listen to it. In terms of the actual language being used by the people in the ad, there was a high level of vocabulary that was being spoken, even though the young women were being presented as ignorant and a little bit frivolous and silly. They were using quite a high vocabulary. The third thing is that the context in which it was being presented was clearly some sort of a nice kind of inner city pub type of venue. Now, these inner city pub type of venues, these are not kind of everyday venues to a lot of people in outer suburbs or regional areas. These are actually quite expensive arenas. To purchase a drink or a beer in a metropolitan pub might put you, upwards of $10 just to buy a beer. And then, of course, the trio of them all sitting together had the feeling of white-collar workers coming to the pub after work, the dynamics that were happening, spoke of a metropolitan audience talking to a metropolitan audience. So in that sense, it was completely missing the audience that it needed to be speaking to, which was outer suburban and regional.
How do you represent those people? Because that's just not the stuff of advertising. The stuff of advertising is hip, young, attractive, aspirational, expensive, right? Not struggling middle class mortgage dowdy in the club. You know what I mean? The No campaign preached fear. If you don't know, vote no, right? That's fear. And as a result, and the Yes campaign tried to preach hope. Literally, this is hope for the future. This is the right thing to do. It's the moral thing to do. And it was a battle of fear versus hope. But the problem is that from a marketing angle, the hope message, to your point, the way that you've just analysed that ad, right? That hope message was so thin. Okay, and it's a referendum, which is tough in Australia anyway. But it's combine all of those things, an opposition that doesn't support it. A lot of people were saying it was doomed from the get-go.
The hope message was geared towards a specific group of people. So the fear message was geared towards everybody in Australia, but the hope message was geared towards a specific group. And then you look at an ad like that, and somebody that is struggling, that can't afford to even buy a house, that's struggling with rent, that is struggling with work, that has uncertainty about their future. Maybe they've gone through a divorce. Maybe their hopes, their own personal hopes have been dashed in one way or another. And then you look at an ad like that and you see the main protagonist there is a well-educated, well-presented Aboriginal person, having a drink in a pub with two attractive young women. And you think, well, actually, that character has it a lot better than me right now.
Right.
And so it actually plays to the politics of envy.
The referendum happened at a time when economically the circumstances were not so salubrious anymore. You're absolutely right, yeah.
The final analysis here is it's a question of timing. Timing for launching something like a referendum is absolutely key. If you're going to launch a message of hope, it needs to be in a zeitgeist of hope. In political campaigns, and the most famous one being the Gough Whitlam campaign.
It's time. It's time, yeah. Look, in politics, it's time is probably one of the absolute biggest drivers. Probably it worked against poor old Albo in this regard, you know what I mean? And, I don't think of him as poor old Albo, but in this regard, he didn't get what he wanted, which is always a tough political position to be in, So from that perspective, I think the timing was against him. He promised it, he wanted to deliver it, to live up to his promise, but the economy went south.
On that note, let's sign off on the marketing minutes, and we'll see you again next time.
Thank you very much.